Hi, everyone, and welcome to Behind the Numbers. My name's Dave Bookbinder, and if this is the first time you've joined us, welcome. Appreciate you being here. This is a show where we dig deeper to understand what really matters most in business. Today, we're going to be having an interesting conversation about artificial intelligence from a very unique perspective. I'm pleased to welcome Faisal Abid, who is a co-founder at Irene Cremations. Hey, Faisal, welcome to Behind the Numbers.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
So let's just start by talking about who you are, share your background,
Yeah.
because when I introduce you as the co-founder of Irene Cremations, um, interesting topic, you might think, but why don't you just share your background?
Yeah, it's an interesting topic and it's something that I'm surprised I got into. Actually, I'm not surprised I got into it because I've always gone into weird businesses, but more specifically, it's the sequence of events that led me to start this business along with my co-founder. My background, I've been in tech since whenever. I dropped out of university to start multiple businesses. And so throughout my career, I've worked for like ebooks, a big company called Kobo in Toronto. I worked at League, which is a big health company. And then 2016, I worked at a company called Zoom.ai. And this is how cremation comes from Zoom.ai, where Zoom.ai, we were trying to build essentially ChatGPT. And the idea was, can we build what an assistant for the enterprise? So I could have something running on my Microsoft Teams or Slack, and I could say, set up a meeting with Dave for next week. And it would send an email out to you, and the assistant would say, "Hi, Dave, I'm Faisal's assistant. Would you want to have a meeting?" Blah blah blah. So as part of that, we ended up in Japan for a competition. And when I was in Japan, I ran into a friend I used to work at all the way back when I first started my career at Kobo. And he actually was the CEO of Kobo for a bit. And he left Toronto, went to Japan to start a Buddhist cremation business. And that got me very interested. I'm like, so I'm there talking about AI and Zoom and stuff to Docomo, I believe. And I see him and I start chatting with him, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm running this Buddhist cremation business. Come by to the office." So I go to the office, and he basically tells me that in death care, it's a very underserved market when you think about technology and how people, when you think about a funeral, you think about going down the street to a funeral home, and that's it. And you don't really think about innovation in this space. So what Taka had done in Japan was built a Expedia for Buddhist cremations, which essentially was you would call 24/7 and they would find the lowest cost Buddhist cremation provider. So that got me very interested into how can we leverage technology and how can we build something that can help people in their time of need. So, many months later, I had this pitch deck that he had given me. It was in my pocket. And I'm like, just basically in my backpack, actually, not my pocket. And I meet this woman that talked to me about a couple businesses that I've done in the past. And I basically ask her, her name is Mallory. I say, "Mallory, what's your big idea? You had all the money in the world." And she says, "Well, I'm a daughter of a funeral director." And I said, "Hold on." And I pull out this pitch deck that Taka gave me many months ago. And I'm like, this is what they're doing in Japan. Can we do something like this in Canada? And while there's not a Buddhist cremation market or significant one, nor did we want to be a Expedia style business, what we ended up doing back in 2020, actually 2019, just before the pandemic, is we launched Irene, which is an online funeral. The idea of Irene is simple. We are a licensed funeral home, but what we've done is for the consumer, they're talking to a funeral director. The funeral director, on the back end, we've built something called Funeral OS, which is using AI, machine learning, and all this stuff that I've learned working at other businesses helping them scale up. How can we make the job of a funeral director that usually takes, you know, that is really important to talk to a family, but all the admin work takes like 6 to 8 hours? And how can we shorten that admin work down to like 10 minutes so that they can spend more time with the family and help them in their time? And that's essentially Irene, and that's how the journey to Irene began.
Yeah, that's a really cool story. And we're going to unpack that a little bit into this conversation about AI impacting, we'll call them non-tech based industries.
Yeah.
But let me start by getting your overview of artificial intelligence, or maybe at a high level. A lot of folks may have the misconception, one way or another, that it's either the greatest thing since sliced bread or it's the beginning of the end of days for all of us. So somebody told me a
Well,
long time ago, the truth is usually somewhere in the middle. But what's your take on all this?
it's absolutely in the middle. Um, it's funny that the word AI has been so tightly coupled now with ChatGPT and Gemini and the language models, right? Back in the day, back in the day, you used to say when you see something fake, you used to say that's Photoshop, and now no one says it's Photoshop. Everyone says that's just AI. And and sure, it is AI in the grand scheme of things, but AI is so much more than just generative AI, which is language models or like stable diffusion and all these things. So my view on that is, I think the language models and what we've done with generative images and all that serve a purpose. They've created this ability for you to interact with the machine in a very sci-fi way, quote unquote, right? Like it seems almost surreal to be able to talk to a machine, but you still need a lot of what I would call the boring machine learning, the true tried and true machine learning behind the scenes, because the language models are not making decisions for you. If you're using it for decision making, you're going to have a bad time because the way they work, they're probability machines. They're not smart. They're not sitting there and reflecting and thinking. There's a lot of tricks that you can do to get them to, you know, um, behave like they're thinking, like the ChatGPT o1, and they work really well. But at the end of the day, they're not sitting there and thinking. And so you need those thinking algorithms. If you were to go to like apply for a credit card, for example, and they're going to look at your credit score and a whole bunch of stuff, they're running machine learning in the back. That's still artificial intelligence. The end result of that could be summarized in a chat GPT like format where you can interact with somebody, an AI, to say, well, why wasn't I approved and stuff. But at the end of the day, it's a great way to interface with it.
Yeah. So one of the big concerns that I know that exists in the workplace is the idea that artificial intelligence is going to eliminate a lot of jobs and replace human beings. Is that really on the horizon?
Yeah, I if you asked me this question about 2 years ago, I would have said no. But I think what you will see a decline in jobs. Like, so outside of Irene, there's a whole bunch of small businesses that I run. One of them is called TradesCall. And TradesCall, what we're doing with TradesCall, we've built a automated assistant that can pick up the phone for you and sell your business. So if you are like an electrician or something and you're out about in the field, you're not going to pick up your phone call. And so what I find is businesses like that, they're getting disrupted. Again, going back to legacy businesses, they're getting disrupted with technology because now an electrician or a plumber doesn't need to go hire a receptionist to answer phone calls, right? You know, they can use something like TradesCall, a whole bunch of other technologies to replicate that. So all these jobs that were really based on um, just input and output. It was like all I'm doing is I'm conveying some information in a proper way back to the human. I think all those jobs are getting replaced. Jobs that require thinking and deep understanding, those are still far from being replaced. I think those are going to be very hard to replace. But definitely jobs that are just, um, help desk jobs, stuff that the only thing the human was doing was looking at some information and conveying that back to the person when the person needed it. Those definitely are.
Yeah, and no disrespect to the chat bots out there, but when we interact with customer service oriented kind of chats, most of the time we're not dealing with a human being. And most of the time, those chat bots are, in my experience anyway, largely ineffective. So
Yeah.
maybe the fear of AI replacing people is a little bit overstated. Um, but it'll certainly help to, we'll call it optimize the human experience, because there's
Yes.
certainly tasks that can be lent to using artificial intelligence, the mundane things. And what's your take on the overall accuracy and efficacy of the artificial intelligence review of documents, for example?
Yeah. See.
There's been stuff in the news where you've seen perhaps where lawyers were using artificial intelligence to write briefs and so forth. And in some instances, the AI literally made things up.
Absolutely. And this is why they're a probability machine. So going back to replacing, yes, there's going to be a reduction in workforce, but the people that are going to exist are going to use AI to augment themselves and produce 2 or 3 times as more work. When you look at like for Funeral OS for Irene, the funeral directors never let the AI take over. The AI did some work, the language models did something, machine learning did something, then the funeral directors have to approve. And that's because, in funeral or legal, or I saw this crazy story where scribes at hospitals got, there was some AI tool there that was transcribing doctor's notes, medical notes, or whatever, and it was hallucinating. It was getting things wrong. And the problem is they deleted the original recordings. So if you went to this doctor a year later, doctor has a note that might technically say you were diagnosed with cancer, but you're not. And that never happened, but the AI just made it up. And the problem
Wow.
with that is the way these language models work, I want you to just think about every word. When you write on ChatGPT or Gemini, you see word by word. And that's not necessarily a fun effect. That is literally how they're working. Every time a word is generated, it goes back to the algorithm and it says, based on this word and the previous couple words, or maybe the whole sentence, or maybe the whole thing, what is the next likely word to show up? So it's like the autocomplete on your keyboard, but in a much, much more greater sense. Now, what's amazing about them is that they have the ability to produce coherent and, for the most part, factual information. And that's just because as they've trained, the probability of producing factual information is more and more likely. But that doesn't mean that it's 100%. And when you're dealing with sensitive stuff like legal or health and stuff, you need to be 100%. Otherwise, what's the point?
Right.
So, for most part, if kids writing an essay, yeah, I mean, I would discourage someone from writing an essay using ChatGPT, then you're not learning anything, but it's going to be fine. But if you're doing something that's life or death, then the language models are not designed to be 100% accurate. That's just the nature of them. There's a whole bunch of ways to look at if they're going to be accurate by double checking the PDFs and prompting it over and over again to get more information. But someone has to know to do that. And if you're just kind of copying and pasting, you're going to have a bad time.
Yeah, well, let's talk about AI, sort of self-checking AI. And here's an example for you I'd like to get your thoughts on. You mentioned the kids writing essays. So imagine you've got maybe somebody who's applying for a job and they
Yeah,
need to generate a cover letter, and maybe they're not the best writer. So they use
yeah.
ChatGPT or something, write a brilliant cover letter, and it in no way reflects their communication skills. And then they show up for an interview or they show up at work, even worse, and they're asked to write something. Um, First of all, on the front end, is there an AI algorithm that can detect the use of AI to generate that cover letter? And bigger picture, from I guess a societal standpoint, how do you integrate these kids who are coming in with no really good writing skills, who've relied on these AI tools to get them through?
I know. I think about that a lot. There is, if you look at OpenAI and Google and even Claude, Anthropic, they're all coming out with what they call watermark checking tools. And what they are, they're watermarking the output of the language models so that you can easily check if this was generated using AI. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? If someone's applying for like a job that is a very communication focused job, and that job is all about talking to stakeholders all day long, and they have poor communication and they use ChatGPT for it. Like that's dangerous, and I don't know how we're going to deal with people like that entering society because you're going to have to basically get them to verbally talk to you and have an understanding, or maybe even write something in front of you. But I think if there's an engineer that is an excellent engineer, can code really well, but has poor communication skills, like poor English skills, that's fine. That's totally fine. So I think it's gonna be very context specific. But what I do fear actually is about, and I sound like a boomer saying this, but I fear about the kids because it was one thing when we were in school and we cheated on, a math exam or English exam. The cheating was a lot less. Uh, it's not like we could just sit there and just steal an exam. Like you cheated by looking over a friend or whatever. But if you were to use AI, you're not really learning anything. You're literally copying and pasting something,
Yeah.
and the problem is it's actually a really good tool to learn. I've learned a lot of interesting topics and subjects by having a discussion with ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude. But if you're using it to just excel in class, I think that's the problem. And I think that requires a whole rethinking of how grades are, how you're given grades. Because in school, the entire optimization is towards 100% or an A plus. And if there's a tool that can get you that A plus very quickly, then I can't blame the kids for doing it. I think the grading system should be really built around comprehension versus just getting some mark, and how you test comprehension. I think that's the hard part. You need more resources to be able to like have a discussion with someone, actually get them to do a math question on the board, like one question that can give them a good understanding of trigonometry or physics or something, and then you know that this person understands it. They're not just chat GPTing their way through school.
Yeah, and the output that you're going to get, regardless, even if it's pristine, uh, obviously edit it, check it, and if you're going to do those cover letter submissions, make it your own. Make it sound like it's in
Absolutely.
your own voice for
Absolutely.
sure. So, Faisal, you did a wonderful job in disrupting an industry that really doesn't, or historically hasn't lent itself to being known as a tech friendly space, if you will. What other industries do you think are really ripe for the infusion of artificial intelligence for disruption?
Oh man, I mean, the nonprofit sector for sure. We're right now working with Save the Children. So as part of outside of Irene, I do consulting under interstellarlabs.net. So we work with a lot of nonprofit, public policy, and a whole bunch of different organizations that are historically very low tech. And what they're realizing is they need tech to communicate their message better. So I'll give you an example with Save the Children. We did a project with them. It launched a couple of days ago. They spent a year or so interviewing kids around the world and researchers on how to prevent kids from being groomed online and a whole bunch of bad things that can happen to kids online. And they put this paper out. The problem is most people won't read this paper. And all that's going to happen is you're going to get small news tidbits, and it's going to be an echo chamber of just researchers reading each other's paper, and really nothing comes from it. So they reached out and they had a great idea where they said, can we take this paper and make it interactive? And what they mean by that is, can you ask this question? Can you build something where I can ask the paper a question and get an answer back? And so someone like me who's not going to read a 600-page report can actually message the paper and say, hey paper, tell me about the three things that kids should look out for online. And what it does is it goes to the paper, finds these facts, and then highlights them. So it's able to tell you where it found those facts to prevent hallucination. And we see a huge uptick in that tool. And while we don't have the data yet, my hypothesis is the people using it, and they're using it for a long time, these people would not have sat there and read the paper. Most people don't have that attention span, and most people aren't academics to sit there and read a long 600-page paper. But it's a lot easier for them to digest information, augmenting AI. So when I see industries like this, I think it's powerful because it's you're taking that industry, you're augmenting it, and they're doing what they do best. Like what at Irene, the funeral directors are doing what the funeral directors do best. They talk to the family. And the AI is just helping them do all the crappy work a lot faster. And so, when I look at nonprofit, definitely nonprofit, every single nonprofit is waiting to be disrupted. The problem with nonprofit is a lot of politics inside. But as you can find really good nonprofits like Save the Children, you can disrupt them. Um, and then there's public policy as well that I see is really big for disruption.
Great. In the opening, you talked about essentially your journey of entrepreneurship. I wanted to just ask you to share maybe with the business owners out there who are listening, maybe some of the critical things that you learned along the way, the things that if you had to do over again, you think twice, or something that you really did well that you would want others to know. This is something you should definitely be thinking about.
Yeah, I think, well, this one's going to seem perhaps counterintuitive or maybe obvious. I think it really depends on the person, but like,
Or maybe
I
somewhere in
think,
between, right?
yeah, somewhere in between. The number one thing, so when I dropped out of university, I started, it was second year, and I started a business. Android had just come. And primarily, I would say the reason that business failed, not, I mean, yes, I had very little business acumen back then. I was like 18. But more than that, I think I was driven into a corner because of my financial situation. And what I realized then was if I just had another, 50, $500, $50,000 in my bank account as my personal savings, that's my personal life, not the company's, I could have perhaps made decisions a bit differently and the business outcome could have been a bit different. So the one thing I tell entrepreneurs all the time is treat business as an arcade game. Everyone's played an arcade game. And the longer you play the game, you're going to get better at it. But the only way you can play the game longer is if you have the coins to play it longer. So make sure you have that personal runway. So when I started Irene and then I started other businesses, some have worked out, some haven't. Some like Irene go through vast transitions. But the constant is I've always kept a personal savings that I know that if I need to invest more money into the business or I need to leave my day job, then I can survive for a while. But I always made sure I had some fallback up until the point where the business was self sufficient. And yes, it's hard. Like you're gonna have to, and this mentality of like hustling and grind and stuff that a lot of people don't like. But at the end of the day, you're gonna have to put in a bit more work than you normally do. Whether it's sacrificing 2 hours in the evening and working on your business, or lunch times from your work, you can go leave and like take your laptop. Like don't do anything on company property, but take your own laptop and do something. I think that's important. You're just gonna have to find the time, but try to keep your income coming in or your personal savings to a level where you can take that risk. Because at Irene, when we started, I didn't pay myself. Actually, both myself and my founder didn't pay ourselves for at least 2 years while we were paying our employees because it was more important we had funeral directors on staff than we paid ourselves first. So we just took odd jobs like contracting and stuff. And yeah, it was hard. Sometimes I was like, my God, I'm so tired. But it worked out in the end. So I think that's the biggest advice is make sure you have that personal runway more than you think it's important, more than you think you should. You should add like another 6 months.
Yeah, and that's great advice because a lot of entrepreneurs, I think, fail to take the leap because of the fear of failure and what's that going to mean economically for them and their family, and that
Yeah,
could be catastrophic, right? So your advice is really spot on by trying to hedge that bet, build your runway, and then leap when it
absolutely.
looks like it's more opportune.
Absolutely. And the thing about failure is funny. I have so many of my businesses that fail. You could argue like Irene Irene is going through a weird time and one day I'll talk about it. But last year we did almost 3 million in sales. And when I talk about when I think about that, I'm like, Irene is a successful business with an uncertain outcome right now. But when I look at other businesses, some of them have worked out really well, some of them have not worked out. And what you kind of realize over time with the failures is like people forget, like no one gives a shit. If you build something, yeah, okay, you might get a lot of hype around it, and then it kind of collapses, and then for like a month or two, people are talking about it, and then people move on. People really don't give a crap about you, and I think the more you understand that, I think you'll start to realize it's more freeing than ever. You start to think, well, crap, I made a big deal about LinkedIn on it or Twitter about it, and I got so many tweets and followers. Now I have to make this successful. Otherwise, you know how embarrassing it'll be? None of those people give a shit. They've forgotten about it right after the first retweet. They don't even know. They've gone on. They're looking at something. So I've always operated under that where, yeah, okay, if it does well, I win. If it fails, that's fine. It's my loss, but no one else is gonna remember it anyways. I'm just gonna go on and do something else.
Yeah. Yeah. You're not as important as you think you are. Get out of your own
No, no,
head.
no, no.
That's awesome. Love it.
We're not as important at all.
Exactly. We aren't. Faisal, we're getting down to the end here, but before we bounce, why don't you tell the audience how they can find you, connect with you, learn more about you?
Yeah, listen, the best way to find me, honestly, is through LinkedIn. Add me on LinkedIn, FAISALABID, or you can just email me, which is my first name, last name at gmail.com. If you have very interesting, disruptive businesses that you're working on, you want like an infusion of AI, we're happy to help. And if you just want to talk about machine learning, AI, business, feel free to reach out. Always happy to help.
Awesome. Sounds good. I know people will benefit from a conversation with you as we did here today. Thank you so much for joining us on Behind the Numbers.
Thank you, Dave.
All right. Thank you. And thank you out there in the audience for supporting this program, watching and listening. We can't do it without you. Thank you so, so much. My name is Dave Bookbinder. I'm known as a valuation expert. I help my clients in valuing their businesses and their intellectual property assets. You can connect with me on LinkedIn as well. I'm always happy to have a conversation. That's it for today, everybody. We will see you next time on Behind the Numbers. Take care.